Stan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Absolutely. All right. So, for people that don't know who you are and have never heard of you, give people a little bit of background of what you do, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Yeah, I'm a IFBB professional bodybuilder and world record powerlifter. I started as a skinny kid and as a 98 and 106 wrestler in high school, and I had a soccer scholarship. Got to college. I was a whopping 140 pounds as an 18-year-old freshman, and I had to go lift weights because I wasn't big enough to play soccer. And so I just kind of fell in love with weight training, and so I started studying exercise science. And next thing you know, I started coaching high school soccer, and then worked with the University of Oregon football and track teams, and just started working at gyms and training, high school and collegiate athletes, and eventually worked up to training professional athletes. And it's just something I've been doing all my life, just competing and coaching and collaborating and traveling around and working with great coaches. And now that I'm retired from competing, I mostly work with Gen Pop people, just dad bods and soccer moms. And I still work with a lot of athletes here and there, but most of what we do now with the Vertical Diet internationally is we just help thousands of people lose weight and feel great.
Wow, that's amazing. What was your claim to fame? Was it powerlifting or bodybuilding?
Yeah, probably mostly powerlifting, because I set a number of world records in powerlifting at the time. And but being a bodybuilder is kind of a unique thing to be both. It
Right.
wasn't very typical. And I think that also is what got me most of my notoriety, is because I ended up in the bodybuilding magazines as the world's strongest pro bodybuilder, which is kind of a circus sideshow act. But hey, it served its purpose. And so I got some pretty good press in muscular development and Flex Magazine, Muscle and Fitness, and the like over the years. And it didn't hurt any when I was on Shark Tank. I got into 10 million homes presenting my cooler product that I had invented and brought to market at one time. And that's been almost 5 years ago now, but it just aired last week again on the repeats. And so I did get a lot of, I think, recognition, just publicity all throughout the world. And with the advent of social media and all the stuff that Mark Bell and I started back in 2009 and 2010 is still watched a lot today. And so I've had an opportunity, I think, as an influencer to reach a lot of people. And so I had a lot of people asking me, Stan, what are you doing? What are you doing for your clients and your athletes? And so I kind of compiled everything into what I refer to as the vertical diet. And it's really, again, it's more than just diet. It's a compilation of everything I learned from coaching and competing and college and collaborating and just working with clients, and all the thousands of questions that they've asked me. And I didn't want to keep repeating the same thing over and over to every single client. So I put it all together in a very comprehensive document that's now over 220 pages with, I think, well over 200 references to videos and articles and peer-reviewed published research. And it just kind of breaks things down into everything that I want you to do as a client of mine, whether you're an athlete or whether you're a soccer mom or dad bod. And it's intended to be simple. It's intended to be simple, sensible, and sustainable, because I find that all of these gimmicky, quick fix trick type of programs just aren't very sustainable. And the most important thing, I think, that I learned it throughout my career is you really have to be consistent with whatever it is that what you're doing in order to get the long-term benefits and the long-term maintenance of those benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. Whose idea was it to go on to YouTube in 2009, 2010? Was it Mark or yourself?
No, that was Mark. He had a camera guy down there, Jim, and he just started shooting content and posting videos. And it's interesting because at the time, nobody presumed that it would be as big as it is now. Now we've got just the videos that I'm on have a couple 100 million views now. If you add up all the different stuff that I've done, and Mark's done well in excess of that, because he's a lot more prolific. He's put out a ton of content very consistently for well over a decade.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so were you guys just working out like crazy prior, like 2006, 2007, 2008, and then you guys basically made the decision to let's put this online. Maybe we can get some like international and domestic traffic.
Yeah, we actually started in 2009 together, and almost immediately started shooting videos and putting them up. And they were very simple. Some of them were pretty short, and they weren't edited or anything. It was just real content that we were posting of the lifts in Mark's gym every day. This was real life stuff. I think that's why people enjoyed it. Nowadays, it's got to be a lot more entertaining and a lot better edited, because people lose interest very quickly because they're so used to. People have gotten so good at putting things into such an entertaining format now that it's hard to.
It's hard to compete. Yeah,
it really is. It takes more time consuming. It takes, I think, more experienced staff to put stuff together in a fashion that's more digestible, and you don't bore your audience.
Yeah, you definitely need a team. You like doing it yourself, forget about it.
Yeah, I agree.
Maybe if that's the only thing that you're doing, but if you have a family, you have a business, you have multiple businesses, you have a podcast, like forget about it.
Right. Yeah, no, hats off to people who do. I know some people who will shoot and edit their own content and post things regularly, and that's a full-time job.
Full-time job.
Yeah. And I'm so appreciative for you and folks like you that bring me on to talk about some of the things that I've done, because then you get to do all the work and I get to talk to your audience. That's fantastic.
Absolutely. But you also help us out too, because you give us good content, and you're a legend. So, people, they want to hear this specific type of stuff. And like our category is alternative health. So you're the right guy to talk to.
Well, thank you. And, a lot of what I talk about is really just from my personal experience. I've said many times, I'm not a guru. I don't have any magic tricks, any gimmicks, any hacks to offer. Some
hard
people,
work.
Some people who watch my stuff for a while, after a while, they're like, well, Stan just keeps repeating this himself. And really, that's all I can do, because those are the things that work. I actually get a little discouraged watching some very bright people kind of traveling out of their lane and making, I think, unsubstantiated claims or overestimating the meaningfulness of particular interventions, when really the fundamentals, they reign supreme. 99% of it is sleep, eat, and train is really the 99% of it. And I kind of talk about this. I wrote an article many years ago, and I called it the 99% rule. And, I talked about that in my seminar with Hafthor Bjornsson up in Iceland some 6 years ago now. It has almost 7 million views. I rolled it out. I said, look, sleep, eat, and train. And we're going to talk about how to do those very effectively and efficiently and consistently. And then almost everything else is kind of a sidebar. I said on Mark Bell's podcast once that if you're religiously taking your little 5-gram thimble-sized scooper of creatine every day, but sleeping 5 hours a night, you're a fucking idiot. And that's the way I feel, is that there's a lot of things that people will do that are relatively meaningless in the big picture. They're chasing the cherry, and the cake is right there. And most of that stuff's free,
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of being disciplined and consistent. And of course, intensity matters with training. But as for sleep and diet, that's a no-brainer, and people just don't, I think, put enough. They don't understand how important it is. And when I went down to train with Flex Wheeler down in 2008, I had been competing for over 20 years, and I was a really consistent, trainer, and I trained very, very hard, obviously, as a powerlifter. But I sat down with Flex for about an hour down at Firehouse Restaurant in Venice when we first connected. And after that, and I had my yellow pad of paper and my pen out, and I was ready to write down all the magic tricks. The Wizard of Oz was going to pull back the curtain, and I was going to see all the magic, And he didn't tell me anything I didn't already know. But I think it made me realize how important it was to double down on those things, the 9 hours of sleep, the nap every afternoon, the 6 meals a day, the calories, the protein, obviously, the consistency with that, but then the training intensity. As hard as I had always been known to train, this was on another level. It really was. And the progression of it. I mean, it was blood and guts. It was Dorian Yates style. day in, day out, 2-a-days, 6 days a week, and it was a grind. And almost every day we ended up laying on the floor in a puddle of sweat. And, at the end of the day, I think Flex asked me one time, he said, will you be disappointed if you don't win your pro card at this show? And I'm like, how could I be? I think about what Kobe Bryant said one time. I didn't want to look back and think to myself, could I have done more?
Yeah.
And at
there's a lot of people that can say that.
Yeah, I had checked all the boxes, crossed all the T's, dotted all the I's. I couldn't have invested one more ounce of energy into any aspect of the whole program. And that's not just inside the gym, but outside the gym. And so that's why I spend most of my time, what I offer in terms of the vertical diet and sleep and hydration and nutrition and digestion and, blood testing and micronutrients and macronutrients and injury prevention and rehabilitation. It's all in there, but it's pretty simple. It's just whether or not you're adhering to it. And so most of what I focus on with my athletes is compliance. I say compliance is the science. And that even with dieting, adherence to the diet has the greatest effects, both in weight loss and long-term weight loss maintenance, irrespective of diet, the type of diet. And so I do work on things like checklists and daily updates with pictures of meals and weigh-ins and hours of sleep and, weekly check-ins with waist measurements and updated pictures. And I check on my clients frequently. All of them send me that information daily, and we check in weekly because adherence is the huge thing. And I'll tell you, the information isn't unique. I'll be honest with you. It's not magic.
Right. Well, let's get into that. Let's break it down so everything's organized, right? So you said that you said eat, sleep, train. I want to go through all of them in their own category and dissect them, and then we could talk about other stuff. But first, I have to ask you: do you like being IFBB pro or powerlifter? What are you drawn more? What turns you on more?
I love both, and I don't think I could have done one or the other because I get bored of them quickly. And it bodes well for my recommendations to competitive athletes because I periodize their training and their diet throughout the year, particularly the larger athletes. I have to keep people engaged and interested, and I have to watch fatigue, and I have to mitigate health issues that often occur with being too big or too strong too often throughout the year. So, everything to me is kind of a flow. And so I do, I've gained and lost, albeit intentionally, over the last 30 years, well over 1,000 pounds, bulking up to over 300 pounds on many occasions, as far back as the early 90s, to compete in powerlifting, to get as big and strong as I could so I could compete in powerlifting, and then dieting down to single-digit body fat so I could step on a pro bodybuilding stage and compete. And so I learned a lot of lessons along the way in terms of how to correct on both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
So I can talk.
Do you think that's lacking? Do you think that's lacking with a lot of bodybuilders? They don't understand the powerlifting side, and a lot of powerlifters don't understand the bodybuilding side?
Possibly, or the importance of each and the unimportance of each. That we could get down and we could deep dive into those things. But I think generally speaking, there are ways to do it that are more effective and more healthy and better for performance on both ends of the spectrum. There's ways to do it wrong, I should say.
Let me ask you it this way. Let me reframe the question. It's your last day on Earth. Obviously, you're healthy. You're not like an old man who can't walk. Last day on Earth. You get one workout left. Are we doing powerlifting with Thor, or are we doing bodybuilding with Phil Heath?
I'll be bodybuilding, probably with Flex Wheeler. Yeah. There's something euphoric about the higher repetition, lower rest period, oxygen debt, lactate, workouts that when you're done and you just sit there and it's I can't use any other word but euphoric. I enjoy it that much. And I'm always cautious when I assign exercise programs to clients that I have to recognize that the best exercise is the one you'll do and the one that you'll do consistently. Good point. And effectiveness is secondary. to be honest with you. And I've got a lot of opinions about exercise, but for the most part, if you don't enjoy it, you're not going to do it long term. And I think you do people a disservice by assigning them a particular task, such as 40 minutes on the treadmill 4 nights a week. It's boring. It's not terribly effective. It's not sustainable. There's a lot of barriers to entry in terms of just getting there, and especially if you're a working professional with kids. But I just love it. The powerlifting to me is very strenuous on the central nervous system, and so I would get brain fog for a day or two after that. You wouldn't even feel the DOMs for 2 days, maybe 3 days, just because your body's numb from the load. I loved it. I loved lifting heavy stuff, but the older I got, the more unnecessary I found it was to subject myself to that kind of loading. I could do it less frequently, and I could utilize heavy exercises that created less fatigue. And this is what I do with my athletes, like a John Jones or a Lane Johnson from the Philadelphia Eagles. And John Jones, UFC fighter.
Yeah, Lane Johnson, he's a tackle, right?
Yeah,
beast mode
with the Philadelphia Eagles. Yeah, he's a freak.
Yeah,
he's 6'6", 330 pounds, but weightlifting isn't their sport, and so you have to be careful. Your body has limited physical capital. All of these athletes, you don't want to spend all that in the gym because they need to invest that capital in their sport-specific work. But with Lane, it's of course football practice, and with a guy like John Jones, it's going to be his martial arts skills, wrestling and boxing and the like. And so what we do in the gym is try and reduce fatigue, but still give them a stimulus that they can maintain or gain strength from. And it's the application of that strength, force production, that makes them bigger, faster, and stronger.
We're still waiting for John Jones to come to heavyweight. Come on, boys. What are we doing? What are we doing? Everyone's hanging out? Come on.
Well, I got him to heavyweight, and now it's just a matter of when will he fight. And he's been very patiently waiting.
Very patient. Come on, John.
Very patient.
John, we love you over here, John. But come on, buddy. Like, dude, you're not getting younger.
He really wants the Ngannou fight. He doesn't have to fight, and so and unfortunately, Ngannou had that knee surgery, so that delayed it even further.
He's going to jump right to Ngannou. He's not going to do a warm-up fight with Stipe. Like,
we've talked about that quite a bit, and he's just not interested. He wants, especially since Ngannou retained his title, and so now that's a super fight, and that's a once-in-a-lifetime deal. And John doesn't want to muddy the waters with any other distraction. He's patient. He's trained hard. He's definitely ready. That's for sure. But he's patient, and that's the fight he's waiting for. And God willing, those super fights, so much can go wrong, as we've noticed with the delays and the injury and all that, and then just kind of the pairing them up and the contract negotiations. It's a nightmare.
Are you a big UFC fan?
Oh yeah, been a UFC fan for years. I was with John for the better part of 8 months last year, putting that weight on him. I went down to Albuquerque and trained down there with him every other week for 8 months straight. And so we were going through this the whole time, the back and forth negotiations with the UFC, and this the whole rigmarole. And John's just as guilty as anyone of the delays, because he got himself into a few bits of trouble there along the way.
Altercations, yeah. And dealing with the UFC, you're dealing with a guy like Dana White. First of all, how can you not love John Jones for going right to Ngannou? Like that, if you don't respect John Jones, I don't know who you're going to respect. Second of all, when you're dealing with someone like Dana White, dude, Dana White is a freaking savage. And, I love him as an entrepreneur. I just think he's a freaking boss, and he's a renegade, and he's a tyrant in the best possible term. But having said that, dealing with a guy like that is amazing at business, when you're on the other end of it, the negotiations could get dragged out a bit.
Yeah, there's no question that there have been some delays as a result of that, but I don't think that the athletes were both ready at the same time. So I don't think that the negotiations were really because I was there through all of it, and I partook in a lot of those conversations, those phone calls, and meeting with the agent and speaking to the UFC. So I have an inside view. I know more than most, and obviously I can't disclose, on John's behalf, some of the information, but the timing, the timing was never right for both athletes. Again, initially it being too soon for John, and then, Nagano getting hurt.
Did you go down to Greg Jackson's? Did you work out there?
Yeah, we worked out at Jackson Winks every night, and we trained at the gym every day. It was 2-a-days for John, for 5 days a week at least, sometimes 6. And he busted butt, and he got himself up to over 250 pounds, and he's ready to roll. I mean, he's ready to go now, but we just don't have an opponent. John is, I think, waiting for him at this point.
A good setup down there? Good weights, or no? It's mostly MMA stuff.
Oh, he didn't train at Jackson Wink for weight training. We went to a different
separate gym. Okay.
Yeah. Jordan down there owns Sia Strength, and it's a West Side barbell style. So we had everything we needed for sure. Nice. We were doing box squats and good mornings out of chains, and boot camp developers, and we brought in a $20,000 overspeed treadmill to run John on for good nervous system stimulation, and so we had all the tools that we needed. What we didn't have, we brought in. So
hell yeah, I can't wait to watch him jump up there. I will be watching. If I don't go to the fights, I will be watching. So
yeah. And in that same time, of course, I met the folks from Henry Cejudo's camp out of Arizona, and now we're working with Mark Madsen, who's a 3-time Olympian and 4-0 in the UFC. So I'm getting Mark ready for his next fight. And then more recently, Chandler Jones, John's brother, who signed a big contract with the Raiders.
Vegas.
He's so we worked with his diet for about the last month, trying to make sure that his weight and energy is good for starting camp here at, I think, next week.
How'd you get connected with the Jones?
Through Mark Bell. Yeah.
Nice. Mark, he's in Sacramento now. When you met him, was he always in Sacramento, or was he?
Yeah, he was in Sacramento when I met him as well.
Gotcha. You've been to his gym, obviously. When I'm up there, I'm going to hit him up.
Yeah, you got to go by. It's phenomenal. And see, I remember Mark when his gym was a little 800 square foot alcove on the side of a CrossFit box, and he just had a squat rack, a monolift, a deadlift floor, and a bench, and a little squat rack in there, and we were all crammed in there together doing our little workout. And Mark, at one point, the CrossFit box owner said that they were going to raise Mark's rent $400 a month, and Mark came to me and said he wasn't going to be able to afford to keep the gym open. And this was 2009, 2010. Look at him now. He's built an absolute international
warehouse now.
Empire.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's phenomenal what he's created.
Yeah. Mark's a savage, man. I love that guy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I gotta give credit to his wife. She's the brains of the operation. He's a plow. Mark is, he just keeps moving forward. Yeah. And then, somebody has to kind of keep things in order all around him. And his wife, Andy, is extremely knowledgeable. And she manages an enormous amount of that. So as a team, they're doing a fantastic job.
Hell yeah, that's awesome. I've never met his wife or talked to her, but Mark's amazing, so I'm sure she is too. Let's talk about IFBB. How does somebody get a card? Is there a board? Is there a committee, like a publicly traded company, and they go, you know what, Stan, I think he's ready, and then they call you up and send you an email, and you get like a certificate in the mail? Like, what's the process?
You got to compete. You got to qualify for nationals. You got to go to nationals and win, or now it's top 2 in your weight class in order to get an IFBB Pro card. So there is a process by which you have to earn it through competition and winning a particular competition. There's only certain competitions that qualify for an IFBB Pro card. More now than I recall in the past. The USA's and nationals are the 2 biggest shows that give cards every year. Now I think the Olympia, the Mr. Olympia Amateur gives a card, and I think there's also the Masters and Collegiate Nationals in Pittsburgh every year with Gary Udit. That's I think the shows that offer pro cards, and you have to take top 2, I believe, in your class. It used to be back when like Flex Wheeler and those guys were competing in the 90s. They would give out 1 pro card a year to the overall winner of the Mr. USA. And back then it was under 198, over 198. I think they did have a 176 and a 154 class, but they didn't have a 220. Or a 212. It was everybody over 198. It was a heavyweight. But you had to win the overall at the USA. which is kind of why those guys in the 90s, by the time they won their pro card, because there were so few given every year, they would immediately end up winning a pro show and going to the Olympia and placing top 10, because they had worked so hard for so long to achieve such a level of greatness that they were already top pro caliber. And then the nationals every year, they would give one pro card to each weight class. That's historically how it used to be. Now they have more classes. They have bodybuilding, they have men's physique, they have classic bodybuilding, and of course they have a number of women's classes now, the figure, physique, bikini.
Yeah, women's blowing up pretty recently.
And initially they gave out a lot of pro cards, and they were giving out like 100 a year. And so every Tom, Dick, and Harry seemed all of a sudden had a pro card, and it kind of watered down in the 90s. If someone was a pro, you knew it. I mean, you walk in the gym and see him and you'd be like, wow. I mean, that was just a freak. These were like Olympia looking guys. And then for a while there, it's like everybody had a pro card, and they stopped giving free memberships to people.
They cut back on the pro card handouts.
Well, I think they're still given a substantial number of pro cards because there's so many classes. But I will say this, the level of competition has dramatically improved. What it took to get a pro card when they first started these new classes, the men's physique and classic and those, and women's figure, physique, bikini, now they're extraordinary talents. You have so many people competing that you start to see these genetically gifted outliers who have, optimized their physiques, and you see, just phenomenal physiques now. It would be much harder now, I think, to get a pro card than it was 10 years ago, for sure, in all of those other classes.
Do you think there's guys from like the 80s, maybe even earlier in Arnold's day, but like the Arnold era, the Lee Haney era, maybe even the Dorian Yates era? You could even say the Jay Cutler, but he was kind of up in the Ronnie Coleman era and the Jay Cutler era, but they were more towards when the internet was starting to pop off, but not too much. Because I remember in 2006, I got really into bodybuilding. I would go to the grocery store and buy those muscle mags and muscle development. I actually had a whole stack of bodybuilding magazines in my room, and one of my dad's friends came over. He's like, "Dude, are you into guys?" He's like, "I don't know about you, bro." And I said, "No, man, I'm just really into bodybuilding. I love it, and I think it's awesome." So that was like the era. So I started getting really into bodybuilding the year that Jay Cutler, I believe it was 2006, when Jay beat Ronnie for the first time and won Mr. Olympia. And that's when I really got into it. But even that was like, 2006. YouTube was created in 2005. So that was very, very early on for what I'm about to say next. Do you feel like those people back in the day, the 80s, 70s, 90s, they have like some type of resentment towards the guys now because they're making so much money doing the exact same thing, not working as hard?
It's interesting because some of the guys in the 90s, there was Joe Weider gave a lot of contracts out.
Yes.
Some of those guys did pretty well, especially when they go over to the European tour and they'd sell pictures and they would come home with tens of thousands of dollars in their pocket. They did better on supplement sponsorships in the 90s. And nowadays, supplement companies are mostly doing these affiliate programs. They're not paying anybody any money to represent them. That individual already has to have a following, and usually they get a percentage of whatever they sell. There's still some elite guys that are getting paid by sponsors, but it's always, as in every sport, it's always the top tier that grabs the most.
You have to actually be famous.
Yeah, nowadays you got to do more work on, if you're a bodybuilder, what have you, you got to create your own following so that sponsors recognize that you can get the message out, that you can reach people. You're right, because there's fewer, magazines aren't doing well. A lot of them have folded. Almost everything's internet based now, social media based, and that's extremely diluted. So it's hard to get a big audience because you're competing against every other Tom, Dick, and Harry that's also out there. And then monetizing that is becoming difficult. People have noticed now TikTok has exploded, but TikTok's conversion rate to monetization is very small. Those aren't buyers. Those are usually window shoppers,
Yep.
A younger crowd that probably isn't as, financially able to purchase products. That's not, I'm not, painting the whole group that way, but I'm just saying that it's not as easy as some folks think. You do have to have, I've often said that it took me 30 years to become an overnight sensation. I had to have a significant resume, having competed and at a very high level in both bodybuilding and powerlifting, and then to have spent so many years working with so many great athletes from all the way back in the 90s, working with, Rose Bowl champion college football players up to this, laundry list of who's who that I've had the opportunity to work with more recently, from, Brian Shaw, 4-time world's strongest man, to Hafthor Bjornsson, world's strongest man, of course, numerous CrossFit national champions, Becca Voigt, and I'm thinking of Camille LeBlanc, lots of great powerlifters, NFL, baseball pros, just I have this kind of laundry list of people that I've worked with, but it took me
Took you a long time. Yeah, for sure.
20 years.
Do you think if you had this opportunity back when you were like a teenager, you would be financially like triple the amount?
I don't know. That's one of the things. I wrote a book in addition to the vertical diet. I've got an ebook called Building a Career in the Fitness Industry, where I talked about why I struggled as a personal trainer coming out of college when I worked at a gym and I was doing personal training. Eventually, I ended up owning 2 different gyms. It was kind of hard to make a living, and still is for a lot of personal trainers. It's kind of a side job for a lot of them. And they go in and they trade time for money, and they try and get their $1 per hour. And sometimes the gym takes a big percentage of that. And it's difficult to do. And so, obviously in my case, as I mentioned, with all of the publicity that I've been fortunate to get over the years, I was able to monetize that by having a big following on social media. Not everybody has that same opportunity, and it can take a lot of work. It can take many years to build a big following on social media, and you might have to have a significant resume behind you of accomplishments in order to ultimately get there. But just as a personal trainer at a gym, I partnered with a guy, Matt Wiedemer, out of Beat Training, and I've done seminars in over 200 seminars in 12 countries in all 50 states. And I've been to hundreds of gyms and met thousands of trainers. I was doing seminars for the trainers up at Good Life up in Canada, all over the country of Canada, teaching their trainers the vertical diet system. And I've done a lot of that throughout the United States. And I see that a lot of trainers struggle. The vast majority of them do. And it's hard for them to make a living. And so I found a model that works, that a number of gym owners apply and their trainers apply. And so we compiled that into this book. And it's not magic. I mean, I'll give you the top 3 or 4 things. You got to train more than one client an hour. There's just no way that you're going to make a living trading one client for 1 hour. They're not going to be able to pay you enough consistently over an extended period of time unless they're wealthy enough to afford that, and that's a small customer base. So you end up training 3 or 4 clients in an hour, but you have to get good at that, because you have to. I'm not saying they train together. It might be an 18-year-old wrestler and a 60-year-old grandmother that you're training at the same hour, but you have to give them both 100% of your attention. And then also secondarily to training more than one client per hour, you're going to need to do recurring billing. The attrition from trying to collect every month from a client, most of them would just ghost you, is terrible. You got to set them up on recurring monthly billing, and then give them, $300 for 8 sessions a month, or $400 for 12 sessions a month, whatever it be. And then you're just available at the gym during particular hours. Initially, you're going to have to work extra hours to accommodate your clients, but eventually you'll be able to get enough clients within your work time. They get you back there?
No, you're good.
You get enough clients within your work time to where you can, they don't have to, like now, if the client schedules a particular hour and they miss, then you got to reschedule and blah, blah, blah. And So we just do 12 sessions a month, come in, I'm here at these hours. You can come in anytime. I'll be able to handle you. It's more convenient for the client. They pay less, you make more. So those are some big things. And then the marketing component is huge. I think people really misunderstand how important the marketing is and how you really have to go out and beat the streets. And the vast majority of your clients, they live within 10 miles of your gym, and you got to go talk to people. You got to approach them. You got to ask them, what they need, and show them that you can help, and give them a free orientation, or, some type of a free week, and get them in their training and get them hooked. And so those
that's
are
for the personal trainers type of people. When you're with, I don't want to say bodybuilders, but like the influencer type people, it's a lot easier to make money now, just because you just have an audience right there waiting for you, right? I remember someone who's probably around your age. I remember back in 2006, I was really into bodybuilding, and actually, it was my baseball coach, and he wanted me to play baseball, obviously. And I was really into bodybuilding, and he just straight up said, "Listen, man, there's no money in bodybuilding. All those guys are broke.
They're broke." I always say, what do you call a bodybuilder without a girlfriend? Homeless. They're all broke.
Oh, that's amazing.
You have to be a good businessman. You can be a bodybuilder and make money, but you're not making money off of bodybuilding. You're making money off of personal training.
All the other stuff, and sponsors is the biggest thing.
Yeah, but you have to earn the sponsorships now. Nobody's going to come give you money because you flex and look good. They're not going to do it. You have to have a big audience, and they're going to give you an affiliate program, so they're only going to pay you if you sell their products. And so you really have to be a good salesperson. I think that's hard. I think the social media stuff's hard. I really do. And I think it's not as meaningful because you don't build the relationships as well as you do in personal training. I mean, Matt's gym, he's got 8 trainers. All of them make over 100,000 a year with the methods that I've discussed. But they're big on marketing, and they build relationships with their clients. And these are, Matt's been running this business for over 20 years, and he's got clients that have been with him that long. And he's got a board on the wall with clients that have been with him 1, 2, 5, 10, 15 years, and he knows them all. He's was probably there when they had their kids and was at their kids' high school graduation. That's personal training, and you have to love it, and you have to love people, and you have to love building relationships and getting them to continue to come back, and giving them results, and just keeping them healthy, for a long, long time. And that's rewarding. And I got to tell you, you only need 20 clients at $400 a month, and you got a 6-figure job. That's a beautiful thing. But you really need to get out there and get those clients. And $400 a month's not a big ask if you compare it to the $70 an hour that most box gyms charge. People would pay well in excess of that. And
but don't you need people reoccurring? Like, people will drop off, so you need like the pipeline to keep feeding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you're always marketing. You're always out meeting new people and inviting them in. And absolutely, you'll have drop-offs and new signups. But generally speaking, with a recurring 20 client base, some drop off, some come in new. That's a 6-figure a year job. That's a fantastic.
Not bad.
No, and it's personal training. I mean,
hanging out, eating out of Tupperwares.
You almost have to laugh. You get to go to the gym and work out, and sometimes you train with your clients. You're there, and if you don't like being in the gym and building those relationships, then find a different business, because that's what it's about. If you want to be successful, nobody's going to hand you money because you give them some, special magic training program or diet.
Exactly. Oh,
hey,
man.
My phone just said 10%, so I got to plug it in. Give me a sec to grab my charger.
Yeah, no worries.
I've got a 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, and they love to steal my charger all the time. Where am I at here? Hopefully that says I'm charging.
Boom.
Am I on there?
Yeah, you're on.
Where's my face? I can't see my face. Well, if you can see me, I can see you.
I can see you. You're perfect. Am
I still centered on the camera?
You're centered. You're centered. No, you're centered. We're good to go. All right, cool. Let's talk about nutrition. What is your philosophy on doing nutrition the right way?
Well, let's see. Let's just go down the list. Calories are king. If you want to lose weight, you got to be in a calorie deficit. If you want to gain weight, you got to be in a surplus, period. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And there's many
gain
paths.
Weight as far as like fat or putting on muscle?
Putting on muscle. And of course, now we start to get into the details. How much of a calorie deficit, how much of a calorie surplus, all of these things, but it should be pretty simple. All diets work when they're strictly adhered to. But whether or not they work long-term is, whether you can maintain them will kind of matter. About 90 to 99% of all health benefits are realized simply from weight loss itself, irrespective of diet. I talked about this in my obesity rant some 5 years ago, and we see this repeatedly in studies that whether it's the McDonald's diet or the 7-Eleven diet or the potato diet or the Twinkie diet or the ice cream diet, they've all been tested. When you lose weight, you actually see an improvement in your lipids, in your blood sugars, in your blood pressure. All of those things improve. That's not to say I would recommend any of those diets, because weight loss isn't the most challenging part of going on a diet. Weight loss maintenance is. And that's going to be most influenced by adherence. And adherence has a lot to do with satiety or hunger and energy levels. If you get tired, you get hungry, the chances are you're not going to be able to adhere to that diet long term. And so that's when I start making recommendations as we go down the list. After calories, obviously you've got your macronutrients, protein being the most important of those. Both for retention and building lean muscle tissue, of course, and but also because of its satiety benefit. And so I'm at 30% protein in most of my diets, 35%. I think you talked to Dr. Gabrielle Lyons recently. It's real consistent with what she does for people of all ages, especially the geriatrics, because we have a kind of a decline in our ability to absorb protein. So then let's go to after protein. About a gram per pound or 0.8 grams per pound is kind of where I put protein. And that would, again, be dependent upon whether or not you were significantly overweight. You might go to 0.8 grams per pound of lean weight or goal weight. But it should be about 35% of your total calories. So that's where I pin my protein. And now fats and carbs. The research suggests it doesn't matter. Where you put those is a matter of personal preference. We've seen that in the Diets Fits trial out of Stanford, spent over a year on 600 people studying both, carb and fat percentages and their effect on insulin. And it just does not seem to matter. The science is consistent now in numerous meta-analyses of RCTs, very tightly controlled, randomized controlled trials. Whether you're high fat, low fat, it really doesn't matter in terms of weight loss outcome when you control for calories and protein. I should say that. When you control for calories and protein, where you put your fats and carbs doesn't matter. It's personal preference. Now, are you able to adhere to a diet that's higher in carbs? And that's really a matter of personal preference. Some people that have a higher fat diet, some of the keto people and those folks, they find that they're more satiated on that. And that's great. It's not replicated consistently. It's really personal preference. Some people find that they don't have sufficient energy on a keto diet. They might get, obviously you have less glycogen in the muscle, and that's also decreases the amount of water that you hold on to, and which then also impacts the amount of electrolytes that you have available in your system. And so people end up maybe possibly getting tired or getting the keto flu or just not having the carbohydrates available to, maybe they get a little brain fog. And those are some things that people say, maybe you need some time to acclimate. That's fine. That's all sensible. I don't need to get into a big discussion about, keto versus carbohydrate intake. It's really personal preference. And so I'm agnostic. I have clients on the vertical diet that are keto. I have some that intermittent fast. I have some that are vegans. I've trained for competition as a vegan, as an ethical vegan. And I make adjustments for all of those people based on what I think are the big rocks. Obviously I control their calories. I get them sufficient protein, and then carbs and fats is personal preference. And then we move on to micronutrients once we're done satisfying all of those demands. And that's one of the things that I manage with keto folks is, are they getting sufficient potassium and sodium so they have sufficient energy and they're not, having issues with getting, getting tired or just coming off the diet or binging because they get brain fog or they just get tired. And performance becomes an issue as well. We're talking right now about
these are the keto people, right? You're talking keto, right?
For keto folks.
Yeah.
And so then I get sufficient micronutrients, and that's kind of the foundation of the diet. There was just another study released today that showed that how important potassium is, and I've always put a big emphasis on using carbohydrates that had a high potassium content. You get 100 milligrams of potassium per every ounce of meat you consume anyhow, so you're going to get some potassium, but you need about 4,700 milligrams a day. And so I get a variety then of carbohydrate sources that are high in potassium. Potato has 1,000 milligrams. Fruits are very high, 500-600 milligrams per cup in fruits. Yogurt's another one that's 500-600 milligrams per cup of yogurt. And we'll go on and talk about calcium next. But so the foundation of the diet, after I've gotten their calories right, I've gotten sufficient protein, and then I've let my client decide kind of where they want their carbs or fats. I get them their micronutrients, and potassium, I lead with that. So they're getting fruit, potato, some yogurts, maybe some spinach or kale, in order to get some fruits and vegetables into their diet. And then after that, we're looking at calcium. And I know that some folks tend to be concerned about whether or not dairy is healthy for you or not. And then we see in the research and the epidemiology that those populations that consume more dairy are leaner and healthier.
Really?
Yeah.
What about being bloated in gut health?
There we go. Now we find out, are you allergic to dairy, which is generally not the lactose issue. It's generally one of the whey protein allergy. Then you obviously can't eat it. And that would be true if you had a peanut allergy or a shellfish allergy or you name it. If you're allergic to a particular food, you have to avoid it. And now we're talking next, after allergy, we're talking about tolerance. And there's a few things to consider. That different dairy sources have different amounts of lactose, and lactose intolerance is usually where people start to get gas and bloating. It's individualistic. It's dose dependent. So some people don't have any problem. Some people have a problem based on the amount that they consume in an individual sitting or for the day. Generally, it's an individual sitting. And a couple things are a factor there. You can titrate small amounts of dairy into your diet. You can use a lower lactose dairy, such as milk would be the highest in lactose. Yogurt would be lower than that. Cheddar cheese would be even lower than that. And then like a Fairlife product would be lactose free because they use lactase enzyme in the creation of that product to pre-digest the lactose. Also, if you've abstained from dairy for a while for one reason or another, your lactase enzyme will downregulate. And so you'd have to reintroduce dairy titrate it in at smaller amounts over an extended period of time, 2 ounces here, 2 ounces there, gradually building it up until your lactase enzyme upregulated and you were able to digest it better. And really the only reason that I would say that is because we do find that dairy can be very healthy. Calcium being one of the major micronutrients in dairy that's important to get. You need 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams a day, and that's going to take 3 servings of dairy.
Does it matter if it's grass-fed or not?
It does not matter. No, there's a lot to do around grass-finished or grain-finished. Of course, all animals are raised on their mother's milk and then grass, and then they're transitioned into, depending if it's a feed cattle, transition to grain finishing.
Corn-fed. Those corn-fed boys.
It's not meaningful, and I know there's been a lot to do about organic versus conventional.
Does it really matter?
It doesn't really matter. It's not meaningful. There's very small, and look, this isn't just me saying this. This is the PhDs. This is Alan Aragon, Lane Norton, Alan Flanagan. The list goes on and on and on.
Wait, so real quick, so I just want to make it clear: eating grass-fed meat versus corn-fed meat, at the end of the day, really doesn't matter. People are like overpaying for no reason.
It would be personal preference for taste,
not taste, for performance and health,
not
overall health.
No, absolutely not. Some of the claims are that a grass-finished beef will be higher in omega-3s. it's not meaningful. It'd be like taking 1 gram of creatine and then claiming that that was meaningful. It's not. You need at least 4 or 5 grams a day to give you any benefit. And more specifically, salmon has 200 times the omega-3s of beef. There just isn't enough omega-3 in beef to give you any physiological benefit as compared to an alternate source of omega-3 that has more of that.
Or you could just take an omega-3 supplement and you're good.
You could. It's just not where you would look for it. I get this argument about things like pink salt too. Well, all of the minerals in there, again, they're not substantial enough to give you any physiological benefit. It would be like pixie dusting a supplement and calling it what do they call those things? A proprietary formula.
You know what, though? A lot of supplements do that. They'll put like a tiny, like a non-efficacious dose and then claim all the benefits.
That's a huge red flag. When you get a supplement that says that it's got a proprietary formula, it usually means that there's not enough of the actual, like you said, efficacious dose. And that's a perfect term and a perfect comparison to grass-fed versus or grain-finished versus grass-finished. It's just not meaningful. It's not efficacious. The difference between the two. Now, if you want to start getting into environmental stuff, that's a whole nother ball of wax. But I don't think that that's supported very well either.
Right, but we're talking about performance and optimal health and stuff, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, beyond the scope of this conversation.
Yeah, exactly. I understand. Is it impossible to put on muscle and lose fat at the same time? Or is that a myth?
No, but there is kind of a hierarchy of when it's easier and when it's harder.
If you're a little chubby, you have some hips, you have a little stomach, and you have decent mass, and you want to get bigger, but you also want to cut down. Is that just a waste of time?
Well, your body fat level will determine whether or not you can, in a calorie deficit, lose fat. Also, your training status. An untrained individual would be more likely to be able to gain muscle and lose fat at the same time. Assuming you work out. Yeah. And now for a trained individual who's already relatively lean, it becomes much harder. And you kind of want to go in waves. You'd like to kind of bulk and then do fat loss, bulk and do fat loss. If you want to get the optimal benefit out of your training, because ideally you'll build more muscle in a calorie surplus. There's just no question.
Right.
And so if you're a trained individual who's reasonably fit, then that's kind of the decision that I have to make with the client. Do you want to lose fat first? Do you want to gain muscle first? If they're a trained individual. And I would opt to try and gain muscle first, just because I'd like to get them on a consistent program.
I feel like that's a slippery slope though, right? Because I know so many guys that they've been thick their whole life and they're always bulking. I'm like, bro, when are you going to start cutting? He's like, oh, I need bigger shoulders. I'm like, yeah, but you're like, you look like a lunchbox. Like eventually you got to cut down. I've never seen you cut. You're always bulking.
Well, now we kind of get into where do they store their fat? Is it causing metabolic syndrome? Is it central adiposity? Is it they getting liver fat? Do they have elevated blood pressure? They have elevated liver enzymes? And that's where the blood test comes in. I've been fortunate more recently to work with Merrick Health, Marek Health.
Shout out to Merrick Health.
Yeah, they're doing a fantastic job for me. I've gotten well over 150 blood tests throughout my career, on almost a monthly basis when I was competing, a month out, day of or day after competition. And when I'm bulking and dieting, and I get them on my clients as well, and I can see through the blood tests what their health markers are, obviously, how it affects their lipids and what have you. And if I've got an individual with poor health markers, elevated LDL, high liver and kidney readings, AST, ALT for liver, and their creatinine and bun for kidney. If I see any indication of fatty liver, whether or not they have to get an ultrasound to more closely analyze that. If I see those things in a client, then we're doing fat loss first. And also as part of the diet, I mentioned the importance of potassium, the importance of calcium. There's other micronutrients in there that can help with your liver health. Choline is one in particular, that 1,000 milligrams of choline a day should be in the diet in order to prevent and reverse fatty liver.
Alpha GPC, more bioavailable.
Yeah, and then periodically throughout the day, because your body can't absorb 1,000 milligrams at once. So if you're going to supplement, you want to use probably 3 doses a day. That's why I do keep eggs in the diet. And again, that's going to be dependent on whether or not that individual is susceptible to high LDL. It's all based on blood tests. If I assign somebody a diet and they tend to have hypercholesterolemia, they have a genetic predisposition for high cholesterol. Now I got to pay attention to how much cholesterol they consume, which is less important than how much saturated fat they consume. Generally speaking, I mentioned that I've got proteins at about 35%. Coming out of the gate, I recommend fats at about 30 to 25%, and the rest carbs. That's my initial recommendation, unless the individual prefers keto, because we see in the literature, and I of course experience with myself and my clients, that, and this would be probably for people who are more performance oriented, that the bout of anaerobic bout of training, the weightlifting in particular, you perform better with glycogen in the muscles.
And 100%. Yeah.
100%. And it's that performance that matters so much. I think that we could take just a minute to talk about that. You talked about gaining muscle, losing fat at the same time, or even losing fat and holding on to muscle tissue. The critical component there, not even more important than your protein intake. And Stu Phillips was just talking about some of the research that he had done at his lab up in Canada recently, where they had put people on a 40% calorie deficit with only 1/2 a gram of protein per pound of body weight, which is well below what,
yeah, everyone's 1.5, right? Yeah.
Everybody's looking at about a gram of protein per pound of body weight, or 0.8. So they took half that amount in protein. We're on a 40% calorie deficit. So let's say your maintenance is 2,500 calories. You're going to get 1,500 calories right out of the gate, which is twice what we would normally recommend as a calorie deficit for a beginning dieter. We'd probably prefer them to only have about a 15% deficit, somewhere around 300 to 500 calorie deficit, I think people commonly hear. So this was a huge deficit with insufficient protein, but they trained very, very hard under supervision. And they were able to not only maintain their muscle mass, but gain a little bit of muscle mass. They gained more at the 0.8 grams of protein per pound of body weight than they did at the 0.5. But they didn't lose any muscle tissue. Having said that, they were exhausted because the training was hard. The training component for restoration of lean muscle tissue is very important. I don't encourage people to go on that big of a calorie deficit, and I encourage them to eat more protein, but we always want to start right out of the gate. This is why, we might have discussed earlier about the fact that I'm not a big proponent of assigning cardio to people, because I don't think it's terribly effective or sustainable or enjoyable. But I assign weightlifting for sure, because that's how you're going to maintain lean muscle tissue in a deficit. I'm just cautious about how much work I ask people to do, because I talked about weight loss maintenance and hunger and energy. And one of the big things that happens when people go out and try and exercise their weight off is they undergo what's called compensation, whereby they end up eating more and sitting more because they're tired from overtraining. And so I want to get a low fatigue stimulus that's sufficient enough to hold on to lean muscle tissue, but doesn't adversely affect their diet efforts by increasing hunger and causing them to sit more, because the training component, the exercise activity, your audience has probably heard this from many of your guests. Exercise activity is not nearly as effective as non-exercise activity. Just the walking, staying on your feet, moving around throughout the day. That has a much bigger impact on long-term weight loss maintenance than exercise activity. And exercise activity is subject to compensation, and your body will start burning fewer calories for the same work invested, and make you more efficient at doing things.
Is it safe to say that hearing that, tell me if this would work, high amount of protein, maybe from shakes and maybe from low calorie foods, high amount of protein, super high, right? You're eating like I guess protein versus calories, you're looking at liver, organ meats. It's probably the best bang for your buck. And then eggs, obviously, and then just taking, high quality protein shakes. But let's assume that person, forget about the hunger pains. Let's say they're super disciplined, they're a Navy SEAL, they can deal with hunger pains, they have energy, but they fight through it. They just want to lose weight and put on muscle. Assuming that the intensity is cranked up to like bodybuilder level, if you take a high amount of protein, but you're in a calorie deficit, can you still get ripped and put on mass at the same time?
If you're an experienced lifter, it's going to be difficult to add mass. You may hold on to your muscle tissue while you lose fat, but it becomes
even with high protein.
Even with high protein, again, I don't think protein beyond a gram per pound or maybe 1.2. If I go higher than a gram per pound, it's generally for a satiety benefit, not for muscle tissue, muscle protein synthesis benefit. I just don't see it in literature that supports that. If you're
so you kind of hit a plateau, and at that point, it doesn't matter.
I agree. At that point, it doesn't matter. That's what we're seeing in the research, that 1.5, 2 times the protein. This is, I think, out of who's the president of the ISSN, Antonio. It's escaping me right now. But
does it matter when you specifically take in the protein? Do you have to spread it out? What if you eat, what if you eat a giant brisket and then you drink a protein shake all in the same sitting, and you only eat once a day or twice a day?
Once a day, you might. I'm going to talk about optimal for, say, a competitor that, the top 5% or 1% of people that want to extract all the benefit. The ISSN, Dr. Jose Antonio, president of the ISSN, has done protein overfeeding studies, which is what some of the information I'm giving you comes from. They see that they recommend about 4 to 5 feedings a day. They like to see, because there's no mechanism in the body to store protein. So once when your body needs protein and it reaches out to get that protein, if it's not available, it'll wait. It's not like you're going to lose 10 pounds waiting for the next protein bolus, but it's not optimal. And if you're trying to maximize, it's the cherry on the cake again. I would say, now, if you want to say, if you're on a diet and you control for calories and total protein, eating 2 meals a day or 6 meals a day doesn't matter for weight loss. But and probably for lean mass retention, as long as you're lifting weights. 2 meals a day, 6 meals a day for the general population, for 95% of people out there. It's a matter of personal preference. As long as you equate for calories, if you like 6 smaller meals or if you like 2 larger meals, and you space those two, ideally you train in between the 2 meals. That's one thing that we like to see, a meal before and a meal after, and those can be 5-6 hours apart. It's probably not a big deal. OMAD, the 1 meal a day, does seem to consistently show muscle loss in the literature. And we see this even from people who are, I think, Slim Land is an OMAD fan. And sometimes he'll take a shake before a workout or after a workout and having 1 meal. He goes to kind of a 22 on days that he actually works out. He'll do a 22 or an 18-4 or a 24, I guess I should say, or a 22-2. Those are hours that he doesn't eat and hours that he does eat. But generally, he's generally speaking, I don't mean to get off topic here, but I've been doing this for 30 years, more than 30 years. I'm patient. I've seen everything. I've tried everything. I watch these people. I watched Dr. Peter Attia piss on keto sticks for 3 years, talking about the benefits of keto, only to watch him subsequently come off of keto and complain about all the problems with it. I was on Mike Mutzel's High Intensity Health podcast. He's the big advocate of carnivore and keto. He adds carbs in now around workouts because he wants to optimize his training window.
It all comes back to the traditionalists.
Yeah. Many of your audience is familiar with Dr. Paul Saladino, Carnivore MD. Yep. I was on his podcast some years ago, and I told him about carbs for working out and how, just some fruit. It was still, I talked about IBS and FODMAPs for digestion, and he could incorporate some easy to digest carbohydrates around training, and it would have a significant influence on his his performance and on his sleep with cortisol and, gluconeogenesis from the liver at night, causing elevated fasting blood glucose in the morning. These are all things I've seen on blood tests from hundreds of clients over the years, and I've experienced myself. Not like I have never done keto. I've worked with Dave Palumbo. I've done keto many times, and I always had a decrement in performance. I was always tired. I was always hungry. I was always weak. And that's not to say that everybody's going to have as significant of a problem as I did. But I just, the general point is like, I'm not trying to shit on anybody, but I've watched so many people go through these evolutions because I'm patient and I see what they launch with and what even Mark Bell, war on carbs. When he wanted to compete in bodybuilding and he wanted to bench 500, he started eating carbs. If you want to perform well, for your top 5% or 1%, and have more energy and have better workouts, and have better blood work in terms of cortisol and fasting morning glucose, I see that adding some carbs in, and it could be timed around workouts. It could be something as simple as a little bit of fruit. If you have digestive issues, a lot of people out there with IBS and a host of other digestive distress problems can't tolerate, grains or bread, and so, I'm cautious not to recommend, a lot of people know the vertical diet and know me for managing digestive distress with a lower FODMAP menu of items to choose from so that you have less gas and bloating. And that's because of my experience with competitive females that I've been working with since the late 80s who get on these egg white protein powder tilapia broccoli diets and end up with
sounds terrible.
It's terrible. They have horrendous digestion problems as a result, and a host of micronutrient deficiencies, the female triad, anemia, amenorrhea, cessation of menstrual period, calcium loss problems.
Well, it is interesting. It is interesting that you say you can eat carbs relatively close to your workout, and then you don't have to eat carbs any other time. And then also, what I've seen, and then talking to guys like Ben Greenfield and stuff, that they implement carbohydrates at the end, like the later portion of the day, because it increases the serotonin production, it increases sleep quality. Would you agree with that? Yes,
I'd agree with that because your brain feasts off of liver glycogen.
Exactly. So
let me see.
So what is your favorite carbohydrate? What's your favorite protein? What's your favorite fat?
My favorite protein, and I recommend a variety.
Okay.
Because of all the things we just discussed, I want to make sure I keep red meat in the diet. You can eat chicken, that's fine. Red meat's 3 times higher in iron, 6 times higher in B12, 9 times higher in zinc. It's just a superior micronutrient dense food. It's got a better omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, which is seeming to be less and less important these days.
This is red meat?
Yes, red meat.
Red meat. Over liver? Over organ meats?
Over chicken. I'm just talking red meat in general. My concern with organ meats, I don't buy into them being any better than muscle meat. For this reason, you shouldn't eat too much liver. You shouldn't eat liver for protein because it's so high in iron and so high in vitamin A, there's a toxicity potential. And so you would probably only want to get 3 ounces twice a week. And that wouldn't be your protein intake because you need significantly more protein. It can augment, it can be one of many sources that allows you to get a very broad micronutrient foundation. And so I'm not suggesting you don't eat it if you enjoy it, but I am suggesting that it's not.
Nobody
necessary.
Enjoys liver. That stuff is disgusting.
That's the thing, and I've tried. I've tried many times.
It's so nasty.
Wow, look at the vitamin profile in here.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, stands on an island. You can only eat one protein. What are you eating?
I'm eating red meat. I think that's the one that has the most.
Ground beef or like prime rib?
In that instance, probably prime rib.
Because for optimal performance, you're on an island and you're like a fighter, and you can only have one protein.
Yeah, I think it would be the prime rib. I do think you need some fats in the diet to maintain health. I don't want anybody out there getting rabbit disease, because.
Okay, what's your favorite fat?
they're eating too lean. I like the fats that are in the foods, the protein sources. I like the fats that are in, meat is over 50% monounsaturated fat. Your
Okay, so you're not
animal.
actually combining fat with it like coconut oil. You're actually saying red meat, you get the fat and the protein in there. You're good. Now we just focus on carbs.
100%. But now you got eggs too, which has a whole micronutrient profile that red meat doesn't have. You got your choline and your biotin that's in your egg, and you've got some fats in there. And again, you've got CLA. Egg or dairy would be next on the list. That has obviously your calcium and your vitamin D, but also has that milk fat binding globulin that does not appear to increase risk of cardiovascular disease. So it's kind of a free fat, as it were. There is some concern, and there is some pretty good literature that suggests that for some people who are subject to hypercholesterolemia or high LDL lipids, that decreasing total saturated fat intake will help reduce LDL. That happens anyhow on the diet I recommend, because if you're only getting in 30% of your total calories from fats, which you should get some fat in, because every cell membrane in the body is a lipid bilayer, and it's important to move A, D, E, and K and all of your nutrients. But fats beyond that which provides you a health benefit do not provide you any additional performance benefit, as we just discussed with respect to the reason why I like to keep my carbs. I get sufficient fats for health. I get them from a variety of sources: red meat, whole eggs, salmon, omega-3s, definitely. It goes in the diet, and dairy. If you're only eating 30% of your total calories in fat, and only 1/3 of those are saturated fat, like a top sirloin steak, it's 1.5 grams of saturated fat and about 5 grams of total fats. Again, over 50% monounsaturated. So 30% of your calories come from fat, and 30% of those are saturated fat. That's 9%. 30 times, 0.3 times 0.3. That's 9% of your total calories coming from saturated fat. That's well below the recommendation of the American Heart Association. My buddy,
What's up, buddy?
My 91-year-old pop, Stan Sr., is downstairs. He lives with me too. So we've got 3 generations of Stans here.
That's amazing.
And his dad's a Stan. So we're not terribly creative in this family. We just pass on the same name.
That's awesome. So he's Stan the third?
Stan the fourth, yeah.
Oh, wow.
He's the fourth. I've got a picture of him and me and my dad with Hafthor Bjornsson here at the house.
Man.
And
That's
it's
amazing.
Hilarious to see the 3 of us little tiny people standing next to this massive Hafthor. So
that's amazing.
Let me finish, buddy. I'll be right with you.
So what is your favorite carb? You choose one carb for optimal performance. For optimal performance and intensity, what's your favorite carb?
I'm going to have to say potato because of the potassium conversation.
Sweet or doesn't matter?
Regular, a little higher potassium, a little less digestive distress.
So like red potatoes?
Yeah, white potato is fine. Potato or fruit, just because they do have micronutrients in them that are important. A lot of people talk about the vertical diet as being a steak and rice diet, and the rice really comes into play where you've satisfied your micronutrient demands, your potassium, with potato and fruit. And now you're a big athlete that has a high calorie demand. Hafthor Bjornsson needs 10,000 calories. Lane Johnson needs north of 6,000 calories a day to fuel his workload at 330 pounds. He can't eat all of that in potatoes or bread or oatmeal. It's just too much bulk for his stomach. And so that's when I started introducing easier to digest carbs like white rice. It was really to fill that gap. Anybody dieting, it probably will never get to white rice because they're going to have to satisfy their limited calories with sufficient micronutrients such as the potato and fruit first.
Gotcha. So you would say, just to play it safe, red potatoes and then fruits. So you could eat some fruit prior to working out and a potato maybe. It's interesting. My dad used to go to Wendy's and get those potatoes before working out. Maybe he was onto something.
Yeah. Well, we used to go to Carl's Jr. and get a big potato after working out. And
Yeah,
even
there
when I
you
was
go.
training with Flex Wheeler for my pro card, we would go to Sizzler afterwards and get chicken and potatoes primarily.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Let's talk about intensity, because we're running short on time. How do you identify intensity? Is it literally just going until your arms fall off, or is it more of like a mental? Is it more of a psychological component of intensity when working out? So if somebody was working out, they go to the gym today, they hear all the bodybuilders talk, oh, intensity, intensity, intensity. That's why we're getting big intensity. What does that even mean? So how would you identify that?
Obviously psychology is a component of it as well, but intensity is really going to be, did you give your muscles a sufficient stimulus to adapt and super compensate to grow, if that's your goal, or get stronger or get bigger? And that stimulus is probably going to have to be more than you did last time, or
Right.
progressively over time, it needs to grow in terms of total volume load. That's times reps times weight. Now, obviously, if your goal is to get stronger, then you're going to be lifting heavier weights for lower reps. If your goal is just for hypertrophy, you can choose a very broad range of repetitions and still get the same benefit. But now you got to watch fatigue. Those heavy sets of 5, you're going to be tired for longer, and it might impact the amount of total volume you can get in for the week, the volume load, sets times reps times weight. I've got a chart that Brad Schoenfeld and Brett Contreras worked on together called Evidence-Based Guidelines for Hypertrophy that I put in my ebook as I talk through a specific program for people to use, whether it's a 3-day, 4-day, or 5-day split, as it were. When you train and what you train is less important than following these guidelines. You should train everything twice a week. You should get to 10 to 20 sets per body part per week. You should train between 5 and 30 repetitions. You should get to within a rep or two of failure. Those are all pretty key components. You should probably get the greatest range of motion that you can accommodate, within the confines of your flexibility. Those kinds of things all probably have a bigger factor as to what you train on what day.
Gotcha.
Not do your full body twice a week,
Right.
or you do upper, lower.
Right. I want to talk about specifically my favorite muscle, shoulders, building the side delts and traps. Now, if you're doing lateral raises and you want to actually put on mass, right? Obviously, a lot of people say, well, if you want mass in the shoulders, you got to do behind the head shoulder press and stuff, and you're working this and you're working that. But if for the side delts, you can really only do so many different things. You could do the machine, isolate it. If you want to put on mass, do you have to do low heavy, or will you still put on size if you go to failure?
You can put on size anywhere between 5 and 30 reps, anywhere between 30 and 85% of your 1 rep max. There's a huge range.
Oh, wow.
As long as you get to within a rep or two of failure, you can use an 85% load for 5 reps, or a 70% load for 10 reps, 10 to 12, or a 50% load for 20 to 25 reps. The key component, define intensity now, since that's kind of the conversation here.
Yeah.
Intensity is how close to failure do you get? If you do 10 reps and you could have done 20, probably not a sufficient stimulus to grow.
So go heavy or go more reps.
You could do more. If you do 12 and you could have done 13 or 14, that's probably sufficient. You don't necessarily need to go to failure. And this is coming from a guy who went to failure his whole life. I was a powerlifter at heart.
How do you know what failure is if you never push it? Because sometimes I'll be like, I'm done, and then I think my mind's playing tricks on me because I just did like 7 more reps.
Well, one problem is, especially with powerlifters, is people start to change their position and incorporate other muscles. We see that with squatting. You can low bar and then start hip hinging and throwing more of the load onto your butt, into your spinal erectors than is on your legs. So you got to be careful. Bodybuilders really try and isolate the muscle group and put it in its weakest position and focus on just that muscle group. With the legs, it would be how far is the knee hinging as opposed to the hip hinging. With shoulders, again, if you're doing overhead press, the further back you lean, the more pec you're going to get into the movement. And that's kind of why people like to do behind the neck, although I don't have the range of motion anymore to accomplish that without injuring myself. And so you're
it's ideal. Obviously, you want to do multi-joint movements to build overall mass on the body, just to kind of see for a beginner what your predispositions are. Some people build muscle groups easier than others. And then when you see certain things prospering and certain things lagging, you can focus more on the lagging items with an isolation movement. So it's ideal to do both and get as much muscle as possible and then start focusing on weak points. You're right. The overhead press does a lot. It's a lot of anterior deltoid. Even any overhead press or incline press, it's going to be a lot of anterior deltoid. You almost have to do a side lateral to really hit the medial deltoid the best.
And it's always high reps, because you never see someone cranking out 80s on the side. I feel like you don't really hit it. So how do you put on mass right here?
Yeah, you don't need heavy weight, and the guys who go heavier use momentum and their traps.
So they're cheating.
Well, yeah, they're just incorporating muscles that they're not intending to isolate, and that is of no benefit ultimately either, to your goals. That'd be true of any muscle group that was lagging per se. You got to find a way to separate it from other muscles that could help it.
Who's the guy? Once you say his name, I'm going to remember. Who's the guy, the legend that has the best legs of all time?
Oh, Tom Platz.
Tom Platz. I saw him train a guy, and it was leg day, of course. And he said, "Okay, cool. Squats is how you build up the glutes and the hamstrings. You build it. That's really how you put the mass on." And then he went to leg extensions and leg curls. He said, "This is where you shape the muscle." So when I hear that, I'm thinking, when you do hamstring curls, you're shaping the muscle, you're making it look better, but you're not actually putting more size on. You have to do like leg press or squats. What do you think about that?
Yeah, there's no evidence to support that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, the muscle, there's no such thing as shaping. That's what like women say. I just want to tone.
That's why I was so confused, because Tom Platz is a legend. Well,
yeah.
If you're lifting weights, your muscle's going to change. It's not like your body knows, but maybe he knows something that I don't.
Well, look, no, he doesn't. If that was his exact description, then it's inaccurate, as is supported by the current literature. Probably one of the most prolific researchers and recognized individuals in hypertrophy is going to be Brad Schoenfeld, and I think it would bode everybody well to buy his book, Hypertrophy. Just so happens, muscle hypertrophy.
Shout out to Brad.
You asked me a muscle question, I'm probably going to be right in here quoting Brad Schoenfeld. And there's a lot of people that say a lot of things, 100 rep sets or 20-second negatives. They just don't pan out in the research. I will say this, and Schoenfeld says it too, and so does a lot of folks, Alan Aragon and Brett Contreras. The bros were right. From what I saw most when I was driving down to Gold's Gym Venice when I was 19 years old, I jumped in the car at Eugene, Oregon, where I was going to college, and I would take a road trip and drive all the way down to LA, and I would go to Gold's Venice and just sit there and watch people train. And every now and then I could ask a question. Most of them were training twice a day. They were training their body parts each body part twice a week. They do legs on Monday and Thursday and chest on Tuesday and Friday, whatever it was.
Right.
But most of them were coming in doing an AM, PM workout. They were training everything twice a week. They were generally training in the 8 to 15 rep range. Some people would do an occasional heavier set, maybe finish with an AMRAP of 20. That's what I kind of saw most people doing. There were an occasional individual that would what's his name, that had the one high intensity set that he used to do one set a week or whatever like that. I forget all their names, but Dorian, I think, had it right. His
extremely intense,
a great range of motion. I just watched Dorian do a hack squat. It'll tell you everything you need to know about building muscle. Now, Dorian would go to failure and get a spot from his training partner a little more than what is the science suggests is necessary. And
he was a hardcore though.
Yeah, and when you're on performance enhancing drugs, it really opens up your window of minimal effective volume. You can train less and still gain, and maximum recoverable volume. You can train more and still recover.
Yeah.
And for natural athletes, they got to keep a little tighter window. They got to get, they don't want to overdo the fatigue, because then it'll cut into their volume. And ultimately, fatigue or pain, muscle damage is not the primary driver of growth. We know now that it's mechanical tension followed by volume, and that any muscle damage is pretty much just a side effect of doing the other two things correctly.
Right. Let's talk about that. So the intensity, thank you for the intensity, clarifying that for the listeners. I've gotten that question. I've had people literally email me, Justin, you say intensity, people talk about intensity. What does that even mean? How do you identify intensity? So I'm glad you clarified that. Well, let's talk about the dark side of bodybuilding and the fitness industry for a second, if you want. I like to identify it as the dark arts. What is your opinion on steroids and performance enhancing drugs in the industry?
I wouldn't know anything about it. Me and The Rock are natty. I don't know if you saw that recent news release on The Rock claiming he was natty.
Stop.
Yeah. No,
are you serious?
Really? Yeah.
Stop. No Come on.
No bullshit. But, I don't know what to think about it. I was low T. I had diagnosed at 20 years old with varicocele, which is kind of a common problem of the vein from the testicle doesn't drain. And so I was low T. I was hypogonadal diagnosed. So I went on testosterone therapy when I was 20 years old.
Wow.
And
that's pretty early.
Yeah, I got, obviously I was an undersized kid, and, I was probably only 168 pounds by then. 1987, 1988, right in there. 1988.
They were doing TRT in the 80s.
1988. I was 158 pounds. 1988. And that's when I went to a doctor and got diagnosed with low T. No, they actually wouldn't prescribe it. So I had to go to the black market and get testosterone. And that's when I started testosterone. It was interesting to hear Dorian Yates all these many years later talking about the same kind of things I experienced back in 1980, 89, 90. And then back then we thought if we went from 1 cc of testosterone a week to 2 cc's, that it was a huge deal, that we were like going to shit a liver. And, we were really doing something great. So for like 2 years, I just did about a cc of testosterone a week. When I didn't have testosterone, I'd try a little bit of Winstrol. But it was, by today's standards, oh my God, it was next to nothing.
Now people are doing growth, insulin, all the crazy stuff.
Yeah, I never put on a huge amount of weight, obviously on 1 cc of testosterone a week. I never gained 30 pounds in a month. That just never happened for me. At any time in my career, I was always kind of a slow gainer throughout my career. But it did make a remarkable difference in my ability to, the way it felt to train, the recovery. I was able to continue to make progress, although albeit slowly. I was able to continue to make progress. I still had plateaus certainly throughout the years. And then it wasn't for, probably 5 years before, as Dorian mentioned in one of his interviews, you go to 2 cc's a week. You're taking 500 milligrams of test or Sustanon or whatever it was at the time it was available. And you just thought, oh my God, this is going to be life-changing. And it's not. It might be a little bit better, but it's hardly noticeable by an individual who's, an experienced trainer. So I just never saw any remarkable benefits. Now, it kind of is what it is. I never competed in any natural federations. Everybody I ever competed against was using performance enhancing drugs in powerlifting and bodybuilding. And so, I can't tell you how many times over the years I would come across guys that would be like, as soon as I get my finances together, like that's all that mattered, was whether or not they had the right stuff or enough stuff. And, you need all the ingredients to bake a cake. There's no question. But having said that, it is one piece of many. I know hundreds and hundreds of guys. I'm sure there's thousands out there who use testosterone or use performance enhancing drugs and don't become IFBB pro bodybuilders or world.
Oh yeah, 100%. You go to any gym, and everyone's doing juice.
Yeah, they get their initial gains, their newbie gains, and they're a lot better than natural. There's no question. Then there's a plateau. And now what do you do? You know, is your sleep right? Is your diet right? Are you training with, smart with the significant intensity? And for what duration of time becomes...
Also depends on the body type, right? I knew a guy that he was scrawny. He was tall. He's 6'3", good looking dude, but scrawny. Couldn't put on any muscle. He started doing steroids and he stayed ripped, but he put on giant traps, giant shoulders, big mass, but his waist was this small and he got all the ladies.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of there's more androgen receptors
in the shoulders.
You see with women too, up in their shoulders and traps and upper back. And a lot of guys in their 50s go on TRT. The next thing you know, they start wearing these little tiny shirts because they get this upper body mass.
Sounds like their
legs don't grow.
Legs are overrated, bro. Just wear jeans.
Yeah. I don't really have an opinion about it other than to say it's a matter of personal preference. And if you're going to be enhanced, don't compete in natural organizations. If you're a dude,
right, of course,
don't compete in women's swimming events.
Let me ask you this. If someone is thinking about, going over to the dark arts, what would be your advice as far as doing it the best professional way?
Start as little as possible as to get a result. Go on and off, maybe just an oral only for the first cycle or two, and then if you decide to go beyond that point,
but test as a base though.
I wouldn't even put test in there. An oral only will have less chance of shutting down your own system. If you just do an oral only, maybe an Anavar for a while.
Really? I heard Anavar. I think Derek talked about no matter what you take, even SARMs will shut you down.
Well, the amount and the duration is what matters most. And so I would suggest that you would have less suppression and you would come back quicker. And so the idea would be to have a short cycle and be off at least as long or twice as long. And I would just slowly, gradually work your way into it. I would also grow the dose. I wouldn't start right out with the full dose that you were going to take for the full 8 or 10 weeks. I would build up over the course of 4 to 5 weeks and get to that top dose and then maintain that for 4 to 5 weeks. I would also say this, and we know this from HRT clinics. I've worked with a bunch of different doctors over the years, and some who own numerous HRT clinics. They have a really high attrition rate. People get on testosterone and they see some initial benefit, and then eventually it stops working. Really what happened is like with most dieters, they come in and they get on testosterone, but they also start sleeping better. They start working out. They start eating better.
Intensity.
And then their intensity, they're all into it, right? Everything's going great. Well, then they stop eating better and they stop sleeping better and they miss some workouts. And then they claim that testosterone doesn't work. It's not working anymore. That's usually what they'll say. It's just not working anymore. It's like, no, you're not working anymore. It's not a panacea. And so I guess that's where the same thing would apply to performance enhancing drugs, to kids in the gym. I don't want to use the word kids. I just don't think that you should start them, unless you're
young men.
For young men, well into your 20s, you should train for a while naturally to see what, kind of build the habits at least. We see the same thing. They'll go on it, they'll get some results. They won't keep getting results. And then, they just quit because they don't understand that it's still it only gives you a particular benefit above that which you would get natural. It's not like it's just, it's a
right,
parabola.
Exactly. Yeah. You look like super Prometheus God bod. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But the biggest thing, would you agree with this? The biggest thing is if you do decide to go into the dark arts, make sure you get your blood work every 3 months, monitor
100%.
it.
Yeah. It's 150 blood tests throughout my career. I get it on all of my clients, and people are saying, well, is it safe? I don't know. It's very individualistic how you respond, whether it's, obviously we recommend taking smaller doses more frequently. If you're going to use testosterone, don't take 300 milligrams in one shot. I'd recommend you take 50 milligrams every other day. Would be my recommendation. You have not as big of a peak or a drop off. And so you get less of the
kind of similar to your testicles producing it on their own.
Yeah, they're gonna shut down, and it's not gonna be as pulsatile as your own system, but at least you won't get. It's when you get the huge peaks that you start to see the most side effects, that the conversion into estrogen, the more acne, those kinds of things, the more DHT elevation. I just see that in clients over the years, that when they take smaller doses more frequently, they have fewer side effects. And it might just be because I recommend smaller doses. I would rather have you pair two things together, a little bit of testosterone with an Anavar than more testosterone. That's what I would prefer. I just think that 1 + 1 = 3 in that business.
I've never taken steroids or been on TRT, but
Yep.
I was always scared that my testicles would shrink. Does it matter?
No, they will, absolutely, because that's what your testicles do, is they produce testosterone.
No, I know they shrink, but does it affect anything? Do you even notice?
No, I mean, you'll notice the testicles shrink, but other than that, you won't notice anything, because your sex drive actually increases as a result of the exogenous testosterone. It's just coming from an outside source instead of an inside source. They come back.
Sign me up, boys. Sign me up, boys. I was always scared about the kids part, though. It's,
Yeah, that's an issue. The more you take for the longer you take it, the less likely that you'll completely recover your own testicular function. There are some medications that you can take.
HCG or clomiphene.
Yep. HCG while you're on testosterone will decrease the amount of testicular atrophy and keep your LH and FSH up, which is your luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. So you may still be able to have.
You think that's while you're on test, you should definitely be taking HCG?
If you intend it to be relatively short term, meaning coming on and going off, and you intend to have kids, I find that for people who intend to be on testosterone for an extended period of time, kind of the blaster cruise folks or those with hypogonadal, that the HCG benefit kind of tapers off after a while. It's just more than it can compensate for.
Gotcha. Yeah. It's interesting that you said that if you take a low dose Anavar, there's a chance that you won't get shut down. Obviously, you're going to have to take a blood test.
I don't think it'll be as significant, and I think you'll come back quicker.
Interesting. Okay. Good to know. All right, guys. Put that on the list for later. Stan, I could talk to you. I could talk to you forever. I got a podcast that I have to go to in person. It's a comedy podcast, a guy that's in Tampa, but I definitely want to do a round two. There's so much stuff that we didn't talk about. For people that want to get a hold of you, get in touch with you, want to buy your books, they want to train with you, whatever. What does that look like?
Everything's at Stan Efferding. My website, stanefferding.com. That's where you can find the vertical diet. My YouTube is Stan Efferding. I have a lot of free content on there. My Instagram is at Stan Efferding. And my meal prep company should be back up and running. We shut down for a couple of months while we found a new provider. On August 29th of this month, we'll be delivering again nationwide meals at stanefferding.com.
All right. You're here to hear, folks, from Stan to Justin, from Justin to Stan. This is the Justin Caviar Show, and we're out. Bye-bye, y'all.